One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. This is episode 300 of the Profit Podcast. I mean, what in the world? 300 episodes? It just blows my mind that this podcast has been around for 300 episodes. I mean, let's be really honest. Technically, if you throw in bonus episodes, all those other things, we've passed 300 a while back, but still 300 episodes of this podcast. And I'm going to do something that's a little different, but also it totally tracks with the topic that we're talking about today. This is the most meta, as in like a Russian nesting doll, like inside, there's always something, like you keep going down, right? This is the most meta piece of content I think I've ever made, because I'm repurposing a talk from She Podcast, which I just got back from. I was at She Podcast Live, the conference this past weekend. I'm repurposing my talk about repurposing. Do you see what I'm saying? Yes, like my talk at She Podcast was the 5 major keys to repurposing your content. And here I am repurposing that piece of content. I know, right? You got to practice what you preach. So we are going to get into repurposing your content today. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So at the end of 2020, it was like that blur of a week, like it's Christmas and then that time between Christmas and New Year's. I don't know how it is for you and your family, but I feel like it's like the blur week where you're like, wait, did we shower today? Like, what's actually happening? All the kids are out of school. Like, sometimes you're off work. Maybe you have to go in for like a day or something. And I just feel like it's just this big blur week where maybe you have to visit family, maybe you're staying at home, but like all the days run together and you likely probably won't get out of your pajamas. No, is this just me? Is this just how it operates in our house? Because that just feels like a real thing every year. And this last year, I binge watched the show The Home Edit. So if you haven't heard of this show, I'm going to link to it in the show notes, but it is awesome. It's on Netflix, and I'm going to link to their Instagram account because I love these two women. They're so funny, and it's so fun. So what they are they're home organizers, and I'm so amazed with what they can do, right? It's like the before and after. You're just like, oh my gosh, like, will you please come to my house and do this with my whole life? Because this isn't my thing. I'm not naturally gifted in the area of home organization or really organization in general. But the thing that they do that's really cool is they use rainbows, right? They use color schemes to bring in all these things that are just so pleasing to the eye. Like if you see people when they have their books color coded, I feel like, is there any other way to do it now? My closet is color coded. Like there's just, it's been life changing to have watched this show and learn what they do. But the reason why I bring it up is because when I see these colors, I think back to whenever I first started wanting to do content, and I was looking up content calendars, and there was a few YouTube videos I watched, and I would see where people would say, oh, like here's our whole content calendar, and it'd be organized by like, oh, this is a podcast episode, and this is going to be a YouTube video, then we're going to post on Instagram, then we're going to do this, like all these like different spin-off pieces of content from one piece of content. And I remember thinking, that's what I want. This was like 2018, maybe even in 2017 when I really wasn't podcasting, or if I was just starting out, but still trying to figure it out. And so to think about like back in the day, looking at all these different things and thinking to myself, I really want to do that, but it feels overwhelming. I feel very lost. Like, maybe you can relate to this. Like, I know I can't see you, but I'm thinking, raise your hand if you've ever felt lost, overwhelmed, confused by your content calendar, right? This is same, right? Same. This has happened to me. I just wanted to be able to record a podcast that could be turned into multiple pieces of content, right? And if you're listening to this today and you've already created content, right? Whether it's you're not podcasting yet, but you used to do blog posts or you write email newsletters, like whatever it is, then you know that these things don't just happen like by snapping your fingers. It takes work. It takes effort. And I really want you to walk away from this episode today with an understanding of how repurposing content can work and a plan for your content creation processes, like how you're going to look at them in a brand new way. Alrighty, I'm so excited. Like content repurposing, I have learned so much by trial and error. Okay, like trial and error. I have tried so many different things. I have made mistakes. I've experimented. I have said, oh, that was an awful idea. Let me backstep and not ever do that again because it was so stressful or so overwhelming or all the things. And then I have other pieces of my processes that I'm like, I finally did it. It's like I figured out the perfect system that works for me. But I want to be really clear. All the ideas I'm going to share with you today, it's not a template. It's not me saying, oh, do A, B, and C, and then you'll get D every single time. The things I'm sharing here with you today are going to be all about the 5 keys for you to figure out how to repurpose your content. Because maybe you're saying, Crystal, I don't want to do a YouTube channel, or I don't post regularly on social that way, or I don't, it's not just a copy and paste, do this, do that. I wanted to give you ideas on how you can take the content you're already creating and get the most out of it. So I did this talk at She Podcast, which is the conference, like I said in the beginning, I just got back from, and I had some really awesome questions. And I started thinking, well, I can't really take your questions here on this podcast episode, but if at any time you do have questions, I want you to reach out on Instagram and send me a DM. I do. If you're like feeling it in the moment, you're likely walking or doing the dishes, maybe you're driving, do not text and drive, do not message and drive while you're listening to this, but I want you to reach out because repurposing content is a really fun topic for me to think of ideas and brainstorm with you. It actually really energized me by everyone's questions that they had about this because I didn't realize this is such a hot topic for other people. I really was just in my own head thinking, oh, this is just something that I think about a lot because this is what I do, right? I teach this, I do this on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, but I didn't realize how excited everyone else was about this topic until I did this talk. So let's go back to the very basics, right? Let's pull back the curtain on what is content repurposing. What does that actually mean? What am I talking about?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Well, the first thing is I just want to give you like a blanket definition. And that content repurposing simply means taking one piece of content and using it for multiple purposes. Okay, one piece of content and using it for multiple purposes that maybe weren't the direct initial intention for it. And it's really not just about like, oh, I'm going to record a video, I'm going to strip the audio out of it and call it a podcast. I know a lot of people do this. I'm not saying that that's bad, but that's not the only way to repurpose a piece of content. You can do that. But if you're stopping there, you may be missing some really big opportunities. And I'm going to give you some examples. But before we get all big and fancy, I really want to challenge you to look at what you're currently doing with the content you already have. So if you're listening to this podcast, and let's say you have up to 20 podcast episodes, right? You're like, well, I haven't been doing it super long, but I also haven't been like, I'm not just beginning. Look at the content you already have, and I want you to look at it with fresh eyes. Like, how can I use this, reuse some of this in a new, unique way? All right. So one example that I have of what repurposing can look like is taking a podcast episode, turning it into a blog post or some, 3 5-minute YouTube clips or 10 social posts, right? You could create quotables or some carousels or video clips, whatever that looks like for you. But I want you to think about what is a system that I could use that can help me repurpose each episode with ease by identifying some of the best pieces of content you already created. Okay, so like I said, if you're just starting, maybe this is an episode you can come back to in a few months whenever you have more content. Like if you are brand new, you're like, I don't even have a website, I don't have, a blog, I don't have anything. This is an episode you're going to want to come back to once you start creating more content and say, wait, what did Crystal say I can do to repurpose this? But if you've been creating content for a while and you're like, okay, I'm ready to start doing some things, I want you to look at the areas of friction that you have when you're creating your content. Is it you setting up your video camera and recording a YouTube and then you're like, I don't know if I want to do that? Or is it recording your podcast? People tell me all the time, they're like, I don't really have a great time to record when my family's at home. Or is it you sitting down to write blog posts and that stresses you out? Like there's so many places of friction that I've found in my business, and I've had to kind of create my own system. That's going back to what I was saying earlier. This is not like a copy and paste, do this, do that. It's going to look different for everyone, and this is going to be an evolution. This will constantly be an evolution if you are a content creator, because look at TikTok. Y'all, no one was teaching you how to do TikTok 5 years ago because TikTok was not around. Instagram Reels were not around. Stories haven't even been around for, maybe not even 5 years. I don't even know how long stories have been around. So this is an ever changing and evolution at the same time. That got a little confusing, but it's an ever changing evolution of your content. So just keep that in mind and kind of keep your eyes open for different ways that you can repurpose the content you're already creating. So what I like to tell people is start with a long form piece of content, which is usually a podcast or an interview, and then break it down. Again, this isn't the only way to do this, but this is the way that I typically see it working really well for myself and for other people, because podcast episodes tend to be 20 to 30 to 45 minutes to an hour long, whereas with YouTube videos, it doesn't always, not everyone's creating 45-minute YouTube videos every single week. Maybe you are. That's fantastic, but I tend to start with the longest piece of content first and the content that I want to be the priority. This podcast is the priority piece of content. I want people coming to this podcast because I feel like we can make a deeper connection here. Yeah, if you go Google, something about podcasting, one of my YouTube videos pops up, awesome that you watch it, but that audience isn't likely to come back every single time. They're usually just looking for a quick hit answer right then and there. Okay, cool. She answered my question. All right, I got to go back to the drawing board and start working on what I was working on. But with a podcast, we can develop a deeper connection. We can develop a relationship. We can develop common grounds for conversations to have in emails, communities, on social media. So this is why I prefer my podcast to be my priority piece of content. And I'll usually pick an episode where my audience has asked me a lot of questions or one that's gotten me the most downloads. That's what I start with. So I have I'm in the works right now. I'm looking at, my content calendar for the rest of 2021, going into 2022, and my most downloaded piece of content, I have not repurposed. And I'm like, Crystal, what are you doing? You're not practicing what you preach. It is my episode about the Office Ladies podcast. It was a deep dive case study on what they did, how they launched it, and all the things. And I keep thinking I need to do more case studies about other popular podcasts because I think that y'all want to know, thoughts on how this worked really well or maybe lessons learned. So I want to do that because it has the most downloads on my whole podcast, and I need to do that. So if you have a podcast episode that has significantly more downloads, don't ignore that. Ask yourself, how can I recreate this into a spinoff piece of content or repurpose that content in a new way? All right. So that's the first example. It's like, okay, you take a podcast episode and trim it down to multiple pieces of content. Another example of repurposing is reusing video content previously used for another purpose. Now, what I mean by this is if you did a live stream. I've done this many times now. Recently, we did the 5-day podcast challenge not too long ago. And I kind of got in a bind where I was like, man, I don't have any more content and I didn't have time to create new pieces of content. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to take some clips from when I did the 5-day podcast challenge and I'm going to turn that into YouTube videos. And it worked out really well because I'm not those were over an hour to an hour and 20 minutes long. If I just downloaded that and put it up on YouTube, there's not going to be a lot of people that watch it. But because I downloaded the whole thing and I stripped out pieces of it that I knew people ask questions about all the time, I cut everything else out, trim the fat, just put the most important piece out there. And those videos have performed pretty well. So reusing a piece of content that was previously used for another purpose, whether it was a live stream, a coaching call, whatever it is, think about how can I use this for something else? And then my example number 3 that I have is taking questions from your community and answering it in a piece of content. So I do this often. You've probably heard me in my YouTube videos, on this podcast. I've previously done this is a question from the community, and I say, I get asked all the time, and then I will put the question in there that people ask me. You actually hear this a lot. If you listen to like several of my YouTube videos in a row, you'll hear me say, I get asked all the time. I don't know what it is. I don't have like a script in front of me. That's just what comes out naturally. And I say that. Maybe I should change it up. Maybe it's fine the way that it is. But this is how I repurpose a piece of content. Whether it's a post that I did in our Facebook group and somebody came back and said something, like I'm constantly thinking, how can I recycle, reuse, and revamp this question, this podcast, this interview, this clip, because it makes things so much easier. My content feels more connected, and I feel like there is a beautiful blend of going from one platform like YouTube to the podcast to my social media. I feel like everything's more connected and like in this nice like symbiotic relationship where it's all working together, which again, this is what I wanted. From the very beginning, when I was dreaming about what does repurposing look like? How can this work? This is what I was thinking of. I wanted everything to be connected in a way. And this is another thing that goes back to branding, like branding or just having a personal brand, having a brand for your business, your content. I didn't want it to be jarring for someone to go to my LinkedIn and say, oh, wait, this isn't the same type of content that she does on Instagram. She's talking about something totally different. Or, she was on her YouTube. That's very different than what she talks about on her podcast. I want it all to be similar, even though it's not the exact same type or pieces of content. So I wanted to make sure that we hit that home. But now we're going to dive into the 5 keys to repurposing content. Okay. If you're taking notes, this is your time to take notes. If you're not, that's cool too. I'm going to have everything in the show notes. So crystalprofit.com/episode 300. So crazy still to say that 300. But okay. So key number 1, I want you to know your why. What is your why for wanting to repurpose your content? And I thought to myself, well, if you're going to ask them to know their why, your listeners, you got to ask yourself. So I hear often, I am terrified of running out of content ideas, right? People tell me I have like 5 good ideas and then nothing else. I don't know what else to talk about. And one of my specialties and what I call my superpower is I never run out of content ideas. Well, I can see one piece of content, prime example, this episode today, as soon as I was putting it all together, I was like, oh, I got to make a podcast episode. It's actually going to be some YouTube videos too, because the content is so good. And I had so many questions about it. So my why for repurposing content is to never run out of content ideas. It's to keep it flowing. It's to keep the evolution going. And I just love recreating pieces of content that have already been successful because it's likely it's going to be successful on another platform. The ones that are like, they don't get downloads, they don't get views. Like I'm not going to recreate those because they're not working as well as other pieces of content. So whether it's adding new stories or new perspectives, different case studies, or simply just revisiting a topic months later, there's always a new take on a piece of content. And I want to go back to that one real fast. So Apple rolled out these huge updates to their app, right? To Apple Podcast. There were so many things that changed this year that I talked about. And things could change in 6 months. Things could change in 12 months. And I can always revisit the pieces of content where I talked about the changes that Apple had. So even if you talk about something once, it doesn't mean that you can never talk about that topic again, right? I mean, you could go through this podcast and look at how many times I've talked about batching or podcast ads or creating content. Like it's not every single time a brand new, like groundbreaking piece of content, but it has a fresh spin on it. It has a new perspective. And that is because I never want to run out of ideas. Okay. So that's key number 1 is know your why. Key number 2 is know your goal. So this is still in line with knowing your why, but my goal with repurposing content is asking myself, how can I use this to align with my goals? Whether it's your business goals, your personal goals, whatever the case may be. I'll be very honest with you. I repurpose my content to free up my creative brain, if that's what you want to call it, right? The creative side of me that sits down and says, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to talk about this month? Or what do I need to talk about this quarter? Well, instead of just putting down one idea and saying, okay, that's one idea. Geez, okay, now I got to think of 10 more. I look at this one idea and say, ooh, how can I use that like 4 different ways? That again, going back to this episode I'm creating today, when I sat down to write out my talk and figure out all my talking points, I remember thinking this is going to make a really good podcast episode. And I bet some YouTube videos are going to come out of this as well. And I'll probably write a lot of good stuff in our weekly email because it's just such a great topic. So do you see how much brain capacity that just freed up for me thinking oh, all this creative energy has to go into thinking of all the things I need to talk about over the next few weeks. I just freed up so much of that brain space, but I don't have to say, what am I going to post about on Tuesday? Well, you can post about this podcast episode. What am I going to post about on Friday? Well, I'm going to post about the YouTube that I created about this podcast episode. So this is my goal. My goal with repurposing content is to free up my time. Another one for me is to appear in more places online. Ooh, this is a really good one, especially for those of you that are you're worried about, I just have a podcast. I don't have a website. I don't have this. I'm trying to, appear to be legitimized, even though I'm just starting out. Well, if you repurpose your pieces of content, there's more things that are going to show up in Google. This is just, what do you do? When you first find out about somebody, you're like, oh, who is this person? You either Google them, you search for them on Instagram, maybe you search for them on YouTube, and you look at where they show up because you want to know, is this person legitimate? If you're trying to sell services, you're trying to sell products, maybe you're trying to sell, things that are hundreds or thousands of dollars, y'all, I'm not going to spend thousands of dollars on someone if I can't find out more information about them online. It's just not going to happen. I typically don't spend thousands of dollars with someone unless I know who they are and I've been following them for a while. That's just my buying consumer behaviors. But I think it's important for you to appear in other places online, whether it's Google searches, whatever you're thinking about, but also it helps you stay top of mind with your audience. Because if you're just putting out a podcast episode once a week, fantastic, right? That's tick mark number 1. That's awesome. Keep going, stay consistent. But if that's all you're doing, you're not talking about it on social, you're not emailing your list, you're not doing all these other things, you're missing the opportunity to stay top of mind with your audience. So I'm not saying you need to go and create 5 other pieces of content that are, 5 other podcast episodes. So you're creating a daily podcast every single day. No, I don't think you should do that. But I think you should look at your podcast and say, how can I also talk about this on social with a new spin on it? Or how can I write, an email to my list by not just repeating exactly what I said in the episode, but teasing it out so they'd be excited to go listen to that podcast. All right. So this has to do with knowing your goal. And then the last point for it is my goal with my podcast and all the content I create is SEO. Y'all, you know this. We've talked about this before. Search engine optimization and appearing in Google. It's just a big thing. It's a big thing for me simply because I have never had the budget or the desire to spend a ton of money on ads. And people will disagree with me. They'll say the only way to grow your business and to scale to, infinity and beyond is to spend a ton of money on ads. I don't agree with that. Because I also don't agree with going into debt for my business. And since it's never really been in my budget to spend thousands of dollars on ads, I don't. I rely on SEO and Google to get me in front of an organic audience. And yeah, I probably could grow and scale a whole lot faster, But also I know that the people that are looking for specific answers are finding me every single time. And I mean, it happened even at the She Podcast conference. I had someone say, oh yeah, I Googled something and your YouTube videos showed up, or I Googled something and your blog post came up. And I was thinking, dang, this Crystal person really knows what she's talking about because she's showing up in all of these searches. That is intentional. This is part of my goal with repurposing my content in multiple different ways. I don't just want it to be a one and done, one hit wonder piece of content, which is what it could be if I just posted a podcast episode, but I create spin-off pieces of content that support that podcast. Whew, y'all, I am on a soapbox today. Okay, you can hear it too. All right, so let's repeat those. So number 1, the 5 keys to repurposing your content is number 1, know your why. Number 2, know your goal. Number 3 is know your plan. Again, we talked about this already. We've touched on it. But when it comes to creating a plan for repurposing your content, I want you to sit down and write every piece of content out on a list of what do you do every week? What type of content do you create? Is it social? Is it an email list? Is it YouTube? Are you doing a live stream? Whatever it is, I want you to write it all down, and maybe you can put in a different column what you would like to do one day. So maybe you're just doing a podcast episode, or maybe you're doing blog posts right now, and you're thinking, I would really like to add in an audio component or a video component to this one day. That's fine. Y'all, all I'm teaching you today was my one day dream. This did not happen overnight. This is 3+ years in the making of, I had several comments this week. They're like, gosh, you create a lot of content. How do you do that? Like how do you have the capacity to do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't wake up on day 1 and do this. I've been doing this for 3 years, right? I have systems. There are lots of systems behind the scenes of how I create as much content as I do, but also I love it. I love creating this podcast. I love creating my YouTube channel. Like, it's not something I do because I have to. It's something I do because I want to, because I have figured out the places of friction that I didn't like, and I either did away with them or I came up with a new set of rules. You've heard me say this before. I do what I want because it's my podcast. I do what I want because it's my YouTube channel. I do what I want because it's my email list. No one's telling me this is exactly how you have to do it. So I want you to look at your own pieces of content. Where's the friction? If you don't like to be on video, then don't be on video, right? If you don't love it and you're not excited about it, then don't do it, right? There's other ways that you can create different pieces of content. Well, I would love to see you on video. I think it's fun. I think you can create a very different connection with your audience on video, but it's not the end all be all. So I want you to think about, how can I use one piece of content across multiple platforms? So social media, blog posts, you could do lead generation, email marketing, video, like whatever this is. I want you to devise a plan. So look at what you're already doing now, and then have another list of what you want to create. And then ask yourself, how can I make a theme for the week? Or how can I have this content overlapping without it being the exact same thing that I'm posting everywhere? Because that's not really a great plan. It's a plan to get you started, right? It's something that if you don't know what else to do, then I think that could work. If you post something that's, you strip the video or you strip the audio out of your video and use it for a podcast, it can work. But I think over time, you'll figure out, what your audience really likes, right? The motto is we all have to start somewhere. So if that's you starting somewhere, I'm all for it. But I want you to just get started. That is the point. So know your plan is key, number 3. Number 4, this is really important. Number 4 is know your time. Know your time. I think it's really important. Remember earlier I talked about one of my goals is freeing up my time. But with repurposing, you have to have the plan, which we just talked about, but you have to know your time and be realistic. So if you're thinking about this, you're like, oh my gosh, Crystal is saying I need to take my podcast episode and turn it into 15 other pieces of content, but I don't have time for that. But it's okay. I can lose sleep. I can create graphics until 2 a.m. and I can do this and I can do that. No, you're going to stress yourself out. So know your own time. Is this realistic? So if you're looking down at your plan, right? You're looking at the list of things that you said that you already do and some of the things that you would want to do. How realistic is it for you to make that happen? I don't know. I can't tell you what's going to work for you. And I can just tell you my own experience, but my time is really fluid in looking at what's going to work from month to month and quarter to quarter. I've talked about this before. It's not a new concept. We've talked about content planning, but whenever I look at my time, I look at, for example, this week, actually, when this episode airs is when this is going to happen. I have a promotion that I was doing with Podcasters Kit, and I'm doing a live presentation. I'm actually going to be doing it the day that this episode goes live. I'm doing a live presentation with Podcasters Kit. Well, whenever I sat down to do my content planning for quarter 4 of 2021, I looked at, I'm doing that presentation. So I should probably think of how I can repurpose this, because October is going to be a crazy busy month because I have She Podcast and I have the Podcasters Kit promotion. So I'm not really going to have a lot of time to create brand new pieces of content. Where can I repurpose things? This is legitimately what I did when I was planning for October. I was like, I know I'm not going to have a ton of time. I'm going to be out of town for several days. And then we have a lot of things going on with the kids and Halloween and, I don't want to be working on the weekends. I want to enjoy my time with my family. So you have to know your time. So just understand, I'm not telling you to go and create all these brand new pieces of content you've never done before. Look at your calendars, ask yourself, how can I repurpose something that I'm already doing, and figure out how that's going to work best for you. If you need help, go check out the information I have on batching content. Okay, that's really going to help with understanding your time. Go to my YouTube channel, look up batching, go to this podcast, scroll back to batching episodes, because that is how you can make the most of your time when it comes to repurposing. All right, number 5, right? We're on number 5 of the 5 keys of repurposing your podcast content. Number 5 is know your limits. Know your limits. This is really, everything's just kind of built on top of this, right? We know our why, we know our goal, we have a plan, we know our time. Know your own limits. And I already said this, but I think that you should start with something simple. Don't wake up tomorrow and say, okay, Crystal told me how I can repurpose all this content. Now I got to put it in action tomorrow. I need to be on Pinterest. I need to be on YouTube. I need to be on Instagram. I need to be on Facebook. I need to create a Facebook group. I need to do this. No, that is not what we're talking about. I want you to know your limits and how much time you have, how much capacity you have, and how many skills you have. Y'all, I don't know if you know this, but I do my own video editing. I edit this podcast. These are the skills that I have. If you do not have these skills and you're looking at, oh crap, I have to outsource all of these things, know your limits. You may have it in your budget to hire a video editor or someone to ghostwrite your blog post or create your graphics on social media. I don't know exactly what your budget is, but know your limits. If you can outsource those things to team members, that's fantastic. Even better reason to start repurposing the content you already have. But if it's just you and you're a one-woman or a one-man show, then you've got to be realistic. Know your limits. Maybe you write down the things that you want to have one day, which honestly, if I look back at those color-coded different content calendars that I was so jealous of, so envious of, it's basically what I have today, because I sat down and said, I want that. I couldn't always put my finger on what that was, but I knew I wanted the organization that I was seeing these other content creators have. I knew that I wanted the fluidity. I don't know if that's the right word, but it sounds good. We're going to go with it. I wanted the brand matching from one platform to the next, and I wanted to be just really comfortable with creating content. I didn't want to sit down every single week and think, oh my gosh, this is so hard. This is so hard. I didn't want that to happen. So every time a piece of friction came up, every time I thought this isn't fun anymore, every time I started questioning, am I doing the right thing? I just was very in tune with self-awareness. And I think it's really important for you to do that as well. Be self-aware enough to know, is this process working? Is this system working? And if it's not, let's find a way that you can make it work for your show, for your content, whatever that looks like for you. So many soapboxes today, so many things. Let's do a quick recap one more time. So the 5 keys for repurposing your content. Number 1, know your why. Number 2, know your goal. Number 3, know your plan. Number 4, know your time. And number 5 is know your limits. If you have any other questions about repurposing, especially if you have very specific questions, I want you to ask them. I want you to hit me up, send me a DM. I would love to answer them. And actually in the next episode, I'm going to go into some of the questions that we had because they were just so good. We had fantastic questions and I want to dive into more of those. So we are going to do that in the next episode. But that's all I have for you today. So if this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast. And I would love it if you would take a screenshot wherever you're listening and tag me on Instagram, share it in your stories, and I will reshare it. And let's start the conversation about repurposing podcast content. But that's all I have for you today. So again, the show notes are crystalprofit.com/episode 300. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.